Tohoku Safari Park is situated near Nihonmatsu City in Japan's Fukushima Prefecture. The city offers a multitude of experiences for tourists, including Japanese castles, sake breweries, the drift racing track at Ibisu Circuit, and the safari park. As soon as visitors enter the park, they can either swap their own car for a safari vehicle or take their own one through the enclosures. The single-track road winds through the open spaces, taking the visitors on a journey through the mock wilderness. The park is divided into 11 areas in which some of the animals roam freely and cars can pass through. It allows visitors the unique opportunity to get up close to some of nature's most fascinating beasts. Safety here is paramount, and visitors are told to keep their windows and doors locked at all times whilst immersing themselves in the safari-like experience. There are more than 120 different species of animals at the facility, including giraffes, elephants, and lions. The first paddock to drive through is home to the lions. After driving through 2 security gates, visitors can begin searching for the pride. They can be easily concealed in the tall grass, on the hillside, or amongst the shrubs and bushes. Whilst it is not recommended to stop the car whilst viewing the lions, in the following enclosure, which is home to only herbivores, people are allowed to feed the animals from their car windows. Goats, camels, giraffes, elephant, and zebras stick their heads through the windows, sniffing for a treat, whilst visitors take some comical photos. Of course, the presence of such animals doesn't just require paying guests to be cautious. The keepers need to be careful too. Kenichi Kato was a 53-year-old keeper who had worked as a zookeeper for 27 years. He was about as experienced as they come and had cared for the likes of bears, tigers, and lions. He was well-versed in animal husbandry procedures and how to care for a huge range of animals, from ring-tailed lemurs to full-grown elephants. Friday, September 29, 2023, started as a day like any other. Kenichi made his way to work as usual. One of his tasks for the day was to feed the lions that were inside the breeding facility at the time. He had done this thousands of times before. There were strict protocols in place to ensure the safety of employees, and Kenichi knew these like the back of his hand. That afternoon, at around 3 p.m., he had to separate the lions and get them into individual cages for them to be transported out of the breeding shed. He was armed with buckets of meat to lure the lions, one by one, into the metal cages. The procedure took patience and attention to detail. The most crucial part of the task was ensuring each door was securely fastened between the keeper and the lions. He threw some meat into the cages, and then Kenichi began enticing the first lion out of its enclosure and into the transportation cage. It was a female and was almost white in color. Her coat glistened. Her body was stocky and powerful. He waved the meat in front of him, and the lioness stood up. It looked hungrily at the meat and obediently began to walk towards it and the keeper. There were several locked doors between the enclosure and the final cage. They squeaked on their hinges as Kenichi opened them and closed them behind himself. He always remained one step ahead of the lion, and with one door separating the two. But something distracted him that day. For some unknown reason, Kenichi failed to secure the gates between him and the lion. Instead, he walked through the next one and failed to secure that one too. Maybe he felt confident that he knew the lions well enough and could trust them. Maybe he thought he had pulled the gates shut. Nobody will ever know. But as the lion progressed down the passageway towards the open cage, it realized that there was nothing between it, the meat, and the keeper. It nudged the gates open one by one, eager for a meal. The bars wouldn't stop it now, as it was walking the same path as the keeper. Blood from the meat stained Kenichi's hand. It smelt good, a tantalizing feast right in front of the lion's eyes. It walked steadily forwards as it was supposed to do, but when Kenichi reached the cage door, there was nowhere for him to go. He backed up into the corner, watching as the lion continued to advance. There was nothing between the keeper and the cat. Did Kenichi now finally realize that he had made a mistake? What was going through his head as he came face to face with the lioness? Kenichi could see the glistening eyes of the female lion as she watched him, never blinking, never flinching. Her footsteps were slow and deliberate, each paw 13 centimeters, 5 inches across. Its claws almost 14 centimeters, 1.5 inches long, sharp and curved, made for clinging on to prey and bringing it down to the ground, tearing through tough hide and delivering fatal blows. When the lion was just feet from Kenichi, it rushed at him. It leapt upwards and brought him crashing down to the floor. The cold, hard, concrete floor. The power from the animal was overwhelming. Although Kenichi could see the attack coming and braced for impact, he was completely overpowered by the lioness. He tried to fight back. He tried to push the enormous cat off him. The fur felt soft and the warmth of the lion's body pressed down on him. 300 pounds, 130 kilograms of muscle tied him down. The claws dug into his skin. He could feel them tearing at his muscle, threatening to rip him apart. The lioness instinctively went for Kenichi's throat. Although she had been born in captivity, her wild instincts were strong. The experienced keeper knew he was in trouble. He knew he had made a fatal mistake, and still he fought for survival. Reaching up with his hands, he tried to gouge the lion's eyes. If he could press his fingers into her eyes, then maybe she would let go. But in the commotion and chaos, he couldn't feel them. He kicked and he punched the predator, but his writhing and squirming only forced the lion to bite down harder. She tried to subdue her prey as quickly as possible. Kenichi yelled and screamed as he felt the lion close its jaws around his neck. The moisture from the lion's breath trickled down his chin, and then he gasped. The lion tore at his neck, and blood poured from the open wound. Kenichi felt himself grow drowsy. His head was spinning, and he was losing blood. Then everything went dark. Moments later, staff came rushing to the enclosure. They had heard Kenichi's desperate cries and knew something was wrong. When they arrived, they could see Kenichi lying still on the floor. The lioness was standing over him in the keeper's section of the breeding house. When they yelled, they startled the lion, and she immediately jumped off Kenichi and scuttled away into the far corner of the walkway. Staff secured the lioness behind locked doors and rushed to Kenichi's side. A dark pool of blood surrounded his head. His colleagues grabbed his neck and applied pressure. Kenichi was still alive. His heartbeat was weak and his breathing shallow, but he was still with them. It was now a race against time to stop him from bleeding and to stabilize him. An ambulance arrived on the scene, and Kenichi was rushed to a nearby hospital in Fukushima City, leaving his coworkers shocked and traumatized. Despite the best efforts of the paramedics and doctors to save Kenichi's life, it wasn't to be. Kenichi had put up a good fight, but he couldn't be saved. He had lost too much blood and sadly lost his life shortly after arriving at hospital. The incident made news headlines. There was shock amongst staff at the facility and visitors who frequented the park. The lions were always a highlight for people who came to see the wild animals. They were the first animals people would see when they drove through the towering security gates, and now one of them was responsible for the death of a worker. An investigation was immediately launched at the safari park. It remained closed until answers could be found. When officials searched the breeding facility, they found all the doors open. Even the cage doors were off their latches. Kenichi had failed to secure a single one of them. The lion had had full access to the keeper's area without any barriers. It was lucky other staff weren't in the vicinity at the same time. For such an experienced keeper to make such a catastrophic mistake is rare, but it was the last mistake Kenichi would ever make before his terrifying final affliction.